Good evening all. So we have come back with a very interesting topic, and today I will be talking about where did Jordanians succeed, and this topic is about a self-reflection on the past and a look into the future. The reason why I am talking about this is about reviewing our current practices and reviewing the possibilities in our future. And in this topic I shall talk, so let's start. Jordanians had always a great influence on the region, and in many from many perspectives, and they have been the leaders in terms of education and the leaders in terms of specialty in across so many sectors. What they have founded group of institutions and organizations across the Gulf, and these organizations grow up to be a very highly respected organizations, and they are still going with a very strong traction using Jordanian labor force and Jordanian specialty and Jordanian knowledge. However, it's time that we rethink about the previous models that we have been doing, that has been building our competitive advantage. So let me just give you a quick brief on the things that have worked for us in the past. So we have built the best universities in the region, or some of the best universities in the region that have attracted a lot of students from across the region. This has changed because the countries in the region, they have built their own universities, and sometimes they have even brought some global universities which have better reputation than our universities to compete on the global to compete in the region. So the region has become more open, the region has become more global, which has put us in a situation where we don't have the same level of competitive advantage as before. We have been the leaders in the construction sector, the leaders in as contractors, and we have established so many construction-related companies, whether it was related to equipment, whether related to construction companies themselves, or to building materials. And some of us have built building materials factories, which they continue to be very strong until our current date. What happened is that a lot of these, similar to China and similar what the United States is facing to China, we are facing with the Gulf. We are facing with the Gulf that the Gulf has become more educated. They have built some of their own capabilities, and they have purchased some of our companies. So they left us in a situation where we don't have the same level of competitive advantage, and sometimes even they will block our advances in particular areas within their market. So for example, the engineering sector, of course, we have some of the best engineers in the world, even in terms of design. But what we see is that a decision maker in the Gulf would prefer to deal with a global company that is being led by a Jordanian, rather than rather than dealing with a Jordanian company that is being led by a Jordanian. So if you have a Jordanian name and a Jordanian leader, you don't get a contract. If you have an American name and a Jordanian leader, you get a contract. If you have an American organization and American leader or whatever, you get a contract. So now we understand that the decision maker in the Gulf does not have the same level of appetite for Jordanian brands as it has for global brands. So we understand that this will affect our progress within these markets, and it affects our advancement with these markets, except we have a severe competitive advantage against global companies. So I will talk a little bit about management and leadership. So some of our best professionals have become leaders in many Gulf organizations. And by that, I mean they have taken very serious roles within ministries, within private companies working in the Gulf sectors, within some of the best companies across the globe. However, the ownership of these companies either stayed to Gulf ownership, or stayed to or even reached a stage where a lot of people from the Gulf who become very educated, who become aware on how to operate their well-founded and well-established companies, they took the role of leadership and they become more active participants in policy making and in management of their own organizations. So the role that Jordanians have played in the past in building banks and building organizations and building ministries and transferring knowledge have changed, and we don't have the same level of contribution because of globalization, because of political situation and political challenges, and the third thing, because of the advancement in infrastructure and individual education in our neighboring countries. Do we think, did we have a choice? I don't think that we had a lot of choice. This situation would have happened anyway. We still have a very strong competitive advantage in the medical sector. These kinds of high specialty that needs a highly specialist, which can contribute to your life and death. Not, of course, the daily operation. So if you are a nurse, you would be expected to be changed. But if you are a highly specialized person, it would be much harder for them to change you because they would not find an easy replacement. But also I would need to focus that even if you are highly specialized, because you carry a Jordanian name or because you carry a Jordanian brand, you don't have the same level of competitiveness as someone carrying an American brand or a global brand. In technology, we have done quite well. We have established two of the best technology companies in the region, Maktub and Souk. Those are the examples, and they have been sold out. It was okay. Then a lot of these tech entrepreneurs went to become venture capitalists, and with these, they would be highly dependent on a capital that in many cases coming from the Gulf. And in many cases, they would be thinking why we don't do our own thing and do a lot of trial and error, and this is what they are doing. So in many cases, they would not really just give you the contracts or give you commitment or allocate capital for your fund. They would rather try to do it themselves, because they would think maybe they would know better, or they would allocate this, or they would hire a British or American expert and they say he can do the same work and even better, why we allocate capital and so on. So this is the current scene, this is the current situation. In terms of media and so on, we have good attempts recently in the media sector. Some of it's very successful, another are less successful. Some of the best writers and best reporters in Al Jazeera are coming from Jordanian origins. We have some of the very good writers, and but however, there is not a very strong appetite for writing and reading in the region, nor than for theoretical knowledge in front of political and military might. So we should understand how our contribution to soft power and how our contribution to culture and intellectual thought help advance our interest within the region. So so let me just focus on the few things that we have, and maybe we can some kind of repair and progress. So our universities, we can focus on these universities and try to continue helping them competing on the global sphere. Our medical sector, our hospitals, our doctors, of course, our companies that are creating medicines, of course, or drug companies. And we need to try to look for new technology companies that really are highly competitive and can compete on the global sphere. However, it's not only building our competitive advantage in few particular areas and in few particular sectors and concentrating the efforts in these sectors. I think it's highly, because, for example, in the technology sector, we had a great advantage, then we lost this advantage to Indians and to people from Eastern Europe. So it's time for Jordanians developers to think again about their contribution to code and their contribution to the development in the light of this global competition from India and global competition from Eastern Europe on the best coders and the best developers around. So we need to focus on finding a new market that will help us to advance and progress. This market can be highly, let me say, highly basic. It could be like Central Asia or Africa. We build this alliance with this country that is trying to develop and find a new natural resource, and we build this relationship and so on. So yes, and we have some good examples in this perspective. Or we can actually look at much bigger market, maybe something like Turkey, maybe something like the European Union. But we really need to find a very strong competitive advantage where we can really accumulate knowledge and build global companies. So yes, sometimes we can contribute to that, but it's a very tricky part. The previous working models that had helped our fathers and grandfathers grow in the Gulf countries are not there anymore. We are seeing a strong globalization trend in the Gulf, and we are facing global companies, and also we are facing an intrinsic feeling of choosing global brands against Jordanian brands by purpose, whether it was in terms of employment as an individual or whether it was in terms of brand itself as a product. So we have two challenges: one, to build a very strong competitive advantage in a certain direction, and the second element is to build to find a market where we can apply this competitive advantage. Now, that was my quick intake on things. In terms of politics and human rights, I think we are still in a very good position, and we actually can. We are one of the best countries in terms of human rights and in terms of overcoming political challenges. However, the political, however, our economical sustainability will highly affect our political independence. So it's time to really focus on few areas where we can build a very strong competitive advantage and link them with a very clear markets. You might be surprised that, for example, maybe we find a market in Russia for a particular, as the Turkish tomato have found a market in Russia. Maybe we find, for example, a market for sweets, or maybe we find a market for drugs, selling drugs in Russia and so on at a price that is different than Europe and so on. So it's time really to find these markets that are willing to give us the chance to compete fairly and willing to help us to build a very strong competitive advantage in few fields and in few sectors. So if you look at Scandinavia, we can see that they are very strong in terms of telecommunication, whether it was Nokia, Ericsson, and so on. So they have built some of the best companies, and they are very strong in terms of maybe machinery. We look at Electrolux, or we look at Volvo and so on. So things like how Sweden, Denmark have operated in Europe maybe can help us operate in the same way. And Scandinavia, they have always focused on their own market, and they try to build a competitive advantage that help them to grow internally and then to contribute to the whole continent, then to contribute the whole world. The thing we have is that we don't have these 4 or 5 countries that we can be working on and try to start with a market that is big enough that can absorb our specialty. So we are in a very challenging position, and on a global sphere we see there is a challenge between China and the United States, that actually China copied a lot of the technology that is coming from the United States and so on, and they have a lot of factories moved there. We see the same thing happening in the Gulf. So we actually established the organization, we established some of the companies, we built a lot of the business models. Then we see that these people, we are not as needed as before, and we have actually some political challenges to overcome. So with this is in mind, we are left with two challenges: building a highly competitive advantage and building a group of markets that can help us build on our specialty and on our technical capacity. We are not the most populous country, so we can't build it based on numbers. We will have always to build it based on specialty and knowledge and the uniqueness of the individual. That's the first thing. So always looking at countries like countries in Scandinavia is a very good model. The problem is we really need a market. We really need a small regional market, then a very big regional market, and maybe some level of alliance. That what we see, some people that we can agree on few principles with, like maybe Kuwait and Qatar, would be much better than dealing with companies like UAE and Saudi Arabia. Why is that? Because sometimes politics affect economics, sometimes even the level of maturity of particular country contribute to the level of economical participation of Jordania. So we need really to find these dots and try to build a new established market with really fair rules for everyone, with rules that can build some level of competitive advantage and can help us to compete on the global sphere. Competitive advantage on a range of products that is based on a uniqueness and specialty and knowledge. And the second one is about finding markets, a small regional market that can help us to grow and can help us to advance our interest, then a very big regional market that can help us to contribute. So I am thinking about we could be contributing to Central Asia and Russia in terms of regional market. We could be contributing to Europe, that's of a global regional market, and we could be contributing to the United States. These are three markets that I see there is a chance for us to participate in. The other option is that we become just active investors in these markets, and with the capital we have, I don't think will be a very a driving force. So if we are Saudi Arabia, then we can talk about becoming an active investor in a particular market or becoming an active investor in a group of markets, but we are not there yet, and we are very far from that. So in terms of business, we need to think about global market, then small regional market. In terms of small regional market, we really need few bilateral agreements with a group of companies that by all means we agree with them politically, and we don't that help us to advance, help us to grow, and they can consume our products and they can consume our services. Where we have succeeded in the past is very different than where we have succeeded now, and it's time that we reinvent ourselves, and we think about the future in a new way. That was my talk. I wish you a great evening, and I shall say salam.